sounds like a story to me, some crazy fable that you would not believe. Oh, but ain't she...
Welcome to the Avram Davidson universe, where we listen to some of the greatest stories ever written, adored by Ursula Le Guin, Neil Gaiman, Leonard Nimoy, Ray Bradbury, and Stephen King. Enjoy classic tales such as Are All the Seas with Oysters, The Golem, Sources of the Nile, and many others. All right, excited for another episode of the Avram Davidson Universe podcast. Today's guest is Scott Bradfield. He's an American essayist, critic, and fiction writer, and he has a fantastic podcast that takes the bathtub. I'll let him talk about that a little bit. Today, we're going to be discussing The Hills Behind Hollywood High, which was originally published in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction in April 1983. And as always, we're always looking for interesting guests. We are always looking for hosts. I'm looking for lots of different interesting people. You don't have to be a long-time Avram devotee who's read every single book. Just if you've read some of his stories and love his work, we'd love to talk to you. Probably the biggest news that's really, really exciting for some of you who are looking at this visually, we just had the inquiries of Dr. Esterhazy published in Japan. And I am actually going to Japan. Probably by the time this airs, I'll have already been there and hopefully have an opportunity to meet with the agent and the publishers who published this great little book. So I'm super fired up about that. And in just a second, we will have Scott on. Scott, as always, awesome to have you on.
Great to see you, Seth. Great job on all the stuff you've done with Avram's work and all the editions of his books. And I read the story we talked about today on their Kindle edition of The Treasury of Avram Davidson, and it read really well. It looked good. I think I saw one possible typo, by the way. Don't let me forget that. I'll tell you where it is.
Let me know for sure.
It's very small, but I hunt these because I know I do a lot of my books on for Kindle version.
Well, thankfully, you're the one who pointed out all the scene break issues that we were having.
That's right. Yeah, that's how I got to know you.
Yeah, that is.
I was wandering through the world saying, does anybody know why it's important to have these scene breaks? And most people were going, a lot of people don't understand scene breaks.
I didn't know what you were talking about the first time we spoke, and everyone else was like, I don't know what he's talking about. And then it became very clear when I read Sources of the Nile that, wow, this is really confusing without these scene breaks.
Especially that's the story where I realized it wasn't Avram's eccentric punctuation, that it was something weird. And I remember I talked to, I just asked people in general, because I personally I take the scene break as I consider that and the paragraph indentation the two most important punctuations in fiction. They're the most important parts, because when your paragraph shifts and when your scene breaks. And so I remember years and years ago, one of my first stories was published in an anthology in England for the Interzone anthologies. And for some reason, this is, in retrospect, I remember this, the editors decided they were going to cut all the scene breaks in all the stories to save space, because they didn't think they were important. They thought they were from the magazine, like magazines just put scene breaks in to make the pages look good. They cut all the scene breaks, and I went to my editor. I literally went to her office, and I was able to talk them into putting 3 scene breaks back in my story, which were like 8 or 10. So ever since then, I've been especially conscious and worried about scene breaks.
There were, I mean, I can't remember how many there were, but it must have been 100 plus that were missing from that. And I think it was just, they all came from the magazines where they were in there. And then I think when my mom and Silverberg put it together, they must have gotten it from other sources like the Doubleday publications. And so those were missing, and I didn't know any better, but I
think I narrowed it down. I probably told you, or I can't remember now. It was in that anthology. All the stories without the scene breaks was that Doubleday anthology. What was it called? Strange Seas and Shores. He has 2 stories similar.
Yep.
And that Doubleday anthology, and in the paperback from Ace, I went back and looked, and they had taken all the scene breaks out. And I think it's just those stories. So your Treasury is my preferred edition. I appreciate it.
I have found some typos in there as
That's
well.
happening.
So, one that's particularly embarrassing, but I only have so much time to fix them.
It is hard. Yeah, I know. I find them in my own things, and it is a lot of. It's
Well,
the worst part of it.
let's just say the word public is spelled in a way that it's probably not good.
Oh, okay. All right. The public purse, I guess, would be a real difficult.
Uh, well, I guess before we get started on today's story, I know you've been doing obviously the podcast,
Mhm.
but maybe talk a little bit about what you're doing these days and a little bit about the podcast.
Okay, I do a podcast. This is, as I said on the podcast, ever since the new our new glorious future has been decided here in America. I'm doing everything I can to just shamelessly self-promote myself. I never used to do it, but I figure our days are numbered. So I'm doing a podcast. I do it. It's not a podcast. It's a YouTube uh, quote program unquote called Reading Great Books in the Bathtub. It's a complete waste of time. I just do it for fun to keep myself. I started it during the first Trump administration just to give myself something to think about besides the newspaper, and so I'm doing it with even more strenuously now. And it's just basically reading books for fun and pleasure and talking about them and yapping endlessly about them for in short 10-minute segments. I'll show you my now that I'm self-promoting shamelessly. I self-published my own books, as you know, and during the first Trump administration, I wrote a book called Three Paragraphs in the Life of Bob Johnson. I would write every day. I would write a story in 3 paragraphs, and Donald Trump is actually a character in here, and it's really set during those wonderful years, and it's very funny. I'm thinking about doing another one. It's called A Novel in 303 Paragraph Stories. So if anyone wants to read a completely useless book that I'm sure actually I wish Avram could have read it because I think Avram would have got a kick out of it. And he would have giggled that girlish giggle he would have. And reading great books in the bathtub is also there's a home edition you can play at home. It's the book of essays and stories and reviews I do for the New
Uh,
Republic and the Los Angeles Review of Books and so forth.
oh,
So
that's great.
check them out if once you've read all of Avram's books and stories and you want to take a break before you read them the second time, you can read these 2 books.
That's great. Actually, I don't know why this kind of your writing made me think of this, but I've been going through some of Avram's correspondence,
Right.
and I noticed a thick group of your letters. And then I was just recently reached out. I got reached out to from someone who's doing a bio on Ursula Le Guin, so I've been going through those.
Oh, Julie Phillips. I heard about that. Yeah.
And then I've also been, I saw some, I'm just interested, I haven't read them yet, some correspondence with Kurt Vonnegut.
Okay.
Uh,
Cool.
and
Avram was a big letter writer. He was
yeah,
always
no,
writing letters. Yeah.
yeah, and Stephen King and right. I mean, there's so many. And then I had someone else who wanted to find out more about Avram's time in Okinawa during World War II, which I know we didn't talk about much.
No, I don't remember talking about it. I don't know.
But I'm looking. I'm going to see if maybe he wrote anything about it in letters to his mom. So I'm getting all those, which is a pretty thick list.
Wow.
But
Yeah,
anyways,
you must have a pretty. It must be a pretty formidable stack of letters altogether. Or
there's thousands upon
yeah,
thousands. I mean, it's
I sent you what I had, which
yeah,
I'd lost lots of them over the years, I'm sure, but I had a dozen or 2 dozen letters over decades, I think.
yeah. No, there's so much. So anyways, I'm sure I could write 20 books, 50 books just on his letters.
That could be that could be a whole lifetime project is putting these letters together. Yeah. And Julie Phillips is doing it. She's the one that did the James Tiptree biography, which I just read. It's actually a very good biography. So
Yeah, and actually there are letters between Avram and
Tiptree.
James slash Alice.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that was the Tiptree was one of the letter writers who would have come up there with Avram in terms of the amount of work they did. They wrote a lot of letters to each other.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to. So I'm looking forward to getting those. I'd be curious. It's kind of segue here, but yeah, there's just so many. If there's a particular, if there would be letters that would be of particular interest out there, I'd be curious about because he
Yeah.
seems to have written to everybody.
Yeah, there must be a lot floating around that you don't even I know
Well,
Gus Hosford would have been friends with him, but Gus's letters and his whole estate's a mess. I don't know. We could talk about that sometime off the show about people I know who
yeah,
probably get letters from Avram or got them.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, today, you chose to read or listen to The Hills Behind Hollywood High,
right?
which I particularly like. Any particular reason you chose this story?
I chose it because I hadn't read it, and I wanted to read it. It was also set in Hollywood, which is a place I lived. I lived very close to Hollywood High in the early 70s, and my dad went to Hollywood High about the same time as your mom and I guess your mom did, because Avram, did they meet in Hollywood? Is that where they met?
No, they met in New York, actually.
Okay, because it was saying that Avram worked, because Avram was everywhere, it seems, in the world.
Yeah.
Like he was just,
Um,
you know.
my mom grew up in LA. Avram went to LA, but they didn't meet up at that
Okay,
time. And then when my mom showed up on Avram's doorstep in New York.
okay. Well, it was an interest. I wanted to read about what Hollywood was like at that time, and that's have to say I was really rewarded for that reason to read it, because it's a wonderful story about Hollywood and the feelings of what it's like to be in those streets, and in a time before mine when I was there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I say let's just go right into the story. What
All
do you
right.
think?
So yeah.
The Hills Behind Hollywood High. Introduction by Grania Davis. Hollywood was my hometown, and Hollywood Boulevard was my main street. I graduated from Hollywood High. Hollywood was a company town, and the big film and TV studios were the company. Avram Davidson lived in Hollywood during the placid 1950s. He worked as a night clerk in a cheap hotel off Vine Street to support his writing habit. Every night he saw the has-beens and the rejects, the character actors and the genuine characters. From our shared experiences, this story was born, about the sacrifices that go on behind the scenes. I collaborated with Avram Davidson on 4 short stories, and on the last novel published during his lifetime, Marco Polo and the Sleeping Beauty. We were working on a dark fantasy novel, Boss in the Wall, just before he passed on. I've been asked how I could possibly imitate Avram Davidson's style. The answer is easy. Nobody can imitate Avram Davidson's style. All I could do was create a framework for his glittering prose, like a jeweler setting gems. There are many Avram Davidson gems in this droll story. The Hills Behind Hollywood High by Avram Davidson and Grania Davis. That there are hills behind Hollywood, that is, behind Hollywood Boulevard and Hollywood High School, is perhaps not universally known. Smog often hides them, and tourists have no reason to look for, let alone explore them. They remain unnoticed by the valley commuters who flood past them twice daily. Fish, it is said, do not see the water in which they swim, nor birds observe the winds which bear them. In the late 30s, according to Life magazine, that omniscient observer of the world scene, the students of Hollywood High School were the most beautiful in the world, being the issue of beautiful young men and women who had come to Hollywood in the 20s seeking movie stardom, and although they had failed, because they had failed, stayed on in Hollywood doing something else, anything else. Success would have removed them to Beverly Hills or Brentwood. Failure prevented their return to Cowpat, Kansas, Absalom, Alabama, or Pretty Bird, Idaho. Didn't make it into pictures, huh, Jeff? Huh, Gene? Ha, ha, ha. So there they stayed, frying hamburgers on Hollywood Boulevard, pumping gas, or sacking groceries on Vine. Marcelling waves or setting perms on Cahuenga, clipping hedges or mowing lawns on Selma. Or, if exceptionally lucky, working in studio jobs on the other side of the cameras. Hollywood was their hometown now, just as Cowpat, Absalom, or Pretty Bird had been. No more profitable, maybe, but lots more interesting. And the beautiful failures met and married other beautiful failures, and together begat beautiful babies, who their parents hoped would make it in the movies, make it big. What? Television? What was that? It was in the mid-50s. The huge red juggernaut trolley cars still rolled down the alley right of way. Vivi's restaurant still advertised breakfast served 24 hours a day, but did not advertise the answer to the old-timer's eternal question, was Vivi Vilma Banky, or was she not? And if not, who was she? Because the old-timers knew she was some movie star from the old days. As to who was the little old lady in the short black velvet tunic and the sandals cross-strapped halfway up her shrunk shanks, nobody had an answer, or knew why she carried a cane-length silver wand. An ancient fairy in the ancient meaning of the word, she stepped her light, fantastic way and bothered no one. Dorothy, Angela, and Luann giggled when they saw her, but only after she had moved well on, as they giggled in confused respect when passing the old dark house smothered in foliage, which was the home of the 90-odd-year-old widow of L. Frank Baum, the original Wizard of Oz. The original house where he had dreamed his strange and strangely profitable dreams. Sometimes the three girls went to buy snacks at the all-night ranch market on Vine, and sometimes they went there just to stare at the odd types who went there to stare at the other odd types. Once they heard a squat woman, who looked as though Central Casting had selected her as a Ma Kettle stand-in, say to her equally typical farmer husband, "Land sakes, Pa, what is this?" holding up the scaly green fruit of the cherimoya tree. And Pa had said, "Looks like an armadillo egg to me, Ma." Past the Hollywood Hotel, which presumably dated from the Spanish Conquista, and near Grauman's Chinese Theater, built like an oriental shrine, with hand and footprints of the famous set into cement out front for the faithful pilgrims to worship, was the business place of Angelo, the dwarf news vendor. Sometimes they would see Angelo darting across Hollywood Boulevard to pick up a bundle of papers, while he meanwhile waved a large white sheet of cardboard as a signal to drivers that he was not merely a driven leaf. Angelo had been in the movies, too. Side by side, waving and squealing, Dorothy, Angela, and Luann had seen Robert Cummings ride past in an open car with his family, and Robert Cummings had waved back and smiled widely, but did not squeal. More than once, they had clutched each other to see, walking on the sidewalk just like anybody else, the movie villainous Porter Hall, not looking the least villainous, looking dapper and rosy-cheeked, and Porter Hall had tipped his dapper hat and said, "Hello, lovely ladies." Lovely ladies. As for names even more, well, much more glamorous than Robert Cummings or Porter Hall, well, Dorothy, Angela, and Luann seldom saw them in the flesh. Very seldom, though, at great and rare intervals, some of the very biggest stars could be seen cruising majestically along at less than top speed, showing the flag, as it were. Tyrone, Lana, Lauren and Bogey, Betty, Ava, Joan, Clark. In a company town, people naturally hope to get jobs with the company. In Hollywood, there is no one company. There is the industry. So although none of their parents had ever become even minor stars, it remained the natural hope of Dorothy, Luann, and Angela that she, and she, and she would nevertheless become major ones. Outsiders, had they ever penetrated the neighborhood of squat, scaly palm trees and pseudo-Spanish stucco houses in the Hollywood foothills, where the smog meets the ocean breezes, might have seen merely three perfectly ordinary teenage girls, wearing fluffy bouffant felt skirts and fluffy bouffant hairdos, or pedal pushers and page boys. One with large dark eyes and a slight skimpy figure, Dorothy, One, a tall and narrow blonde with a face marked chiefly by freckles and zits, Angela. One with a lovely complexion and a lavish bosom, but stocky hips and legs, Luann. To themselves, however, they were far from ordinary. They were daughters of Hollywood. Moviedom was their birthright. Obstacles in the form of imperfectly good looks were merely temporary, things to be overcome. They were still at Hollywood High School, yes, but they merely endured the boring academic routine. Really, classes in English, like they were some kind of foreigners. They saved all their enthusiasm for their drama courses. If there were diets, Luann dieted them. If there were complexion creams, Angela creamed her complexion with them. If there were exercises, all three exercised them. Luann for hips and legs, Angela and Dorothy for bosoms. And did it help? Well, Luann at least obtained a one-shot modeling job, with her picture cut off above the hips. Angela did get, once, an extra part in a scene at a youth rally. Politics? Circa 1953? Bless your Adam's apple, no. The youths rallied for, in the film, a newer and larger football stadium. These opportunities never knocked again. Even so. But Dorothy got nothing at all. Sigh. The last straw was the sign in the storefront window, now signing up for open air spectacular. Wanted 100 teenaged girls. In she went. Surely if 100 were wanted, No. But why not? The woman at the table heaped with application forms said, Because, honey, who goes to see these things? Men. She pronounced this last word as though she were pronouncing pubic lice, and went on to explain. My dear, the average American man has never been weaned. If a girl is not prominent in the mammary section, if she doesn't have what is called a full figure, though one might ask, full of what? Well, Mr. Average American John hasn't gotten his money's worth, the fool. Perhaps she should have stayed. Or perhaps not. What she did do, after getting the hell out, was to walk fast. Next, to walk rapidly. And next, to run. Then to stumble. Then to halt. And then to start weeping. She didn't burst into tears. She just wept. And cried. At that moment, Dorothy caught sight of her slender, tiny self reflected in a store window. Even amidst her grief and woe, she realized that, if her life had been a movie, someone would have come up behind her and asked, Why are you crying? At that moment, someone came up behind her and asked, Why are you crying? The moment was one of genuine thrill. Mingled with its pleasure, however, was an element of alarm. The voice wasn't that of a wholesome, handsome American boy with a mouthful of large white teeth set in a cornflake smile. No, it definitely had a foreign accent. Dorothy looked up. Was the man who had spoken? Was he tall, dark, and handsome? Truth to say, not altogether. He was rather short. He was kind of dark. Sallow, one might say. He had large, shining eyes. Now, there was nothing wrong with all of this, or with any of this. Dorothy had long ago learned that even the most wholesome-looking of American boys was not above urging her into some rotten old Nash or Chevy or Studebaker, stinking of grease, and then trying to get fresh with her. She gave a cautious sniff. No auto grease. However, something else. What? Something odd. But something not unpleasant. Why are you crying? The man repeated. Impossible to guess his age. It's my figure, she said mournfully. It's too thin and skimpy. This was the strange man's signal to say, Nonsense, there's nothing wrong with your figure. It's all in your mind. You have a lovely figure. Which would be her signal to slip away and get going. Men and boys had lied to her before, and with what result? Never mind. What the strange man did say was, yes, that is certainly true. It is too thin and skimpy. About that, you should something do. So right. I need to see a doctor, she whimpered. I am a doctor, said the stranger. In his hand, he held a small, wet, glistening bottle of a brown liquid, which he shifted to draw a wallet out, and out of the wallet, a card. He handed the card to her. It read, Songham Hong Bong Van Leeuwenhoek, Dr. Philosoph, Batavia. The word Batavia had been crossed out with the thin point fountain pen, and the word Jakarta written above. The word Jakarta had been scratched out with the thick point fountain pen, and the word Hollywood written beneath. In pencil. I have only come down to buy this bottle of celery tonic at the deli store. Of course you are familiar with it, an American drink. I wish to have it, with my Reisfell. How, rice table, you would say. It is a mixed dish, such as me, self. Part Netherlands, part Indonesian. Are you fond of? Dorothy had no idea if she was fond or not fond of. She had a certain feeling that this doctor with the funny name was weird. Weird. But still, there was the chance that he might be able to help her. If anything, it increased the chance, for everything normal had certainly failed. Is your office near here? She asked. It wasn't like other doctors' offices, for sure. It had funny things in it. Skulls, stuffed things, carved things, things in bottles. Other doctors didn't give her a spicy meal. Was she fond of or not? Well, it was different. So, what kind of medicine do you think will help me? The doctor, who had been eyeing her intently, seemed surprised by the question. What? Ah, the medicine. Oh, to sure be. He got up and opened a few drawers, then took out a funny-looking bottle with a funny-looking powder in it. In my native island, Sumatra, he explained, I was very interested in natural history and botany, zoology, and pharmacology, also hunting and fishing. And so, therefore, but details. She eyed the powder. Do I take it by the spoonful? Or in a capsule, doctor? He was again staring at her with his odd, shining eyes. Take? Oh, but first I must examine you, said he. Well, what he did with Dorothy before, during, and after the examination was certainly no worse than what had been done with her by others, not that most of them had been doctors, though this doctor used his fingers fairly freely. It was, well, interesting. And the couch was nicer than the back seat of a tatty old jalopy, and the spices and incense certainly smelled lots better than auto grease. Nymph, he said, after helping her on with her clothes. You seem in excellent physical condition, exception of Thin, skimpy figure, of course. The medicine substance. It is a glandular one, which I prepared myself from, but details you would not be fond. I will dilute with water, he said, moving to the sink. But nothing came from the faucet, save a wheeze, a grind, and a trickle of rust. Ah, I had forgotten. Repairs. They had informed me. No water for a while. So, another liquid, eh? Not alcoholic. What? Oh! He took up the small bottle of celery tonic. It was still half full, and he pulled the odd stopper out of the odd bottle and emptied the carbonated beverage into it, swirled it several times, handed it to her. Well, this certainly beat paying a drugstore, and it was better than an injection. She closed her eyes and swallowed. And swallowed. How did it taste? A little like celery, and no worse than she had expected. Much easier than exercises. How much do I owe you? She asked. Once again, the liquid look. Oh? Oh. Please pay me with the pleasure of listening with me some of my maternally native music. Here is one gramophone. I shall play some gamelan. After quite some of this unusual music, the doctor asked how she felt. She said she felt sort of funny. He said he would examine her again. She said she would go to the bathroom first, and then, removing her shoes and holding them in her hands, she silently left the premises of Song Hab Hong Mong van Leuvenhoek, Dr. Philosoph, and went home. After a night of odd and restless dreaming, in which she seemed to be rather high up in a greenish place with lots of grass and trees, and some rather, well, funny, peculiar people, Dorothy awoke with a faint, sick headache. Was it? No, it wasn't. Wrong time of the month, for one thing, and it really didn't feel like that anyway. She drifted back to sleep, this time with no dreams, and awoke again. As she stirred in her bed, the thought came that she did feel heavier than usual. The medicine. Had it begun to work so soon? She hurried to the bathroom and hopped onto the scales. As she looked down, she realized two things. For one, she had certainly gained weight. And for another, her feet were covered with dark hair. Oh my God! She whimpered, and slipping off her nightie, she turned to face the full-length mirror. It wasn't just her feet. It was all of her. As far as she could see, and even in the mirrors she couldn't see all of her, she had turned into a gorilla. It was certainly better than turning into a giant cockroach, but that was all she could think of in its favor. The pounding on the door had been going on for a long time. Of course, it was impossible to let anyone see her, and what good luck that her father had gotten one of the irregularly occurring jobs which kept the household going and was away helping build sets on location somewhere. She'd better speak through the door. But someone was speaking through the door to her. "I know you're in there, Harry," the voice was shouting. Harry? Then they already knew. How? Who? She peered through a gap in her bedroom curtain, being careful not to move it, but in vain. Though she scuttled away in terror, whoever was outside began tapping, rapping on the bedroom window. Suddenly, she remembered whom she'd seen. Not Harry. The man was shouting for Harry, her father. Dorothy's mother, smelling of whiskey and perfume, had vanished from their lives some years ago, but she had left debts, lots of debts. Dad had borrowed to pay the debts, then he borrowed to pay the money he had borrowed. The whole thing had spiraled and doubled and tripled and then fallen into the hands of the Greater Los Angeles Punitive Collection Agency. In fact, as she tiptoed into the living room, she saw that another of the familiar cards had been slipped under the door. Bang, bang, bang. "I know you're in there, Harry. Better open up and let me talk, Harry. We can't wait forever, Harry." On the card was printed the name Hubbard E. Glutt, District Agent. Mr. Glutt wasn't an entire stranger. He wore a once white shirt and a once gray suit, both with ingrown ketchup stains, and he had extremely hairy nostrils. It could not be said, even with the best of intentions, that he was a very nice man. His breath smelled too. "Go away, please, go away," Dorothy said through the door. She was thankful to note that her voice was unchanged. She wasn't thankful for much else. "My dad's not in." "I don't care who's not in," yelped Mr. Glutt. "You gonna pay something?" "But I have no money." Mr. Glutt made a noise between a grunt and a snarl. "Same old story. My dad's not in and I have no money, huh? Still not in? Well, I got a suggestion." Here his voice sank and grew even nastier. "Let me in, and I'll tell you how we can, take maybe $20 off a bill, little girl. Uh-huh-huh." Dorothy could stand it no longer. She jerked the door open and pulled Mr. Glutt inside. The scream had not even reached his throat when Dorothy's new-formed fangs sank into it. As though in a blur, she dragged the suddenly inert body into the breakfast nook and feasted on it. Moments passed. The blur vanished. Oh, God, what had she done? Killed and partially eaten someone was what? But how? Gorillas don't eat people. Gorillas eat bananas. Don't they? Therefore, she wasn't even a gorilla. She was some sort of monster. Like a werewolf. A gorilla? Trembling with shock and horror and fear, she stared at her image in the big front hall mirror and gave a squeal of terrified loathing. The hair that covered her was now darker and coarser, and her facial features had coarsened too. Her fingernails had become talons, although fragments of the pearly peach nail polish still remained. And examining her mouth as the squeal died away, she saw that it was full of yellow fangs. She began to sob. How could something like this have happened to her? That's what girls always asked when they found themselves unwantedly pregnant, as if they didn't know how. But this was worse than pregnancy, 1,000,000 times worse. And besides, pregnancy had a well-known cause, and she really couldn't imagine what had caused this. Then a sudden thought came, echoing like a clap of thunder, illuminated as by a flash of lightning. That weird glandular extract medicine, which she had taken only yesterday, to make her figure fuller. Well, fuller it certainly was. But oh, at what a price! There was nothing to do but call the doctor and have him come over and give her something to undo its effects. Only, would he make house calls? Well, she'd just have to see. Only, alas, she could not see. The most searching examination of the LA phone books, all several of them, failed to show any listing for a Dr. Van Leeuwenhoek, however spelled, nor could she remember a phone in his small apartment. She was afraid to go out as she was now, at least by day. At night, maybe. If anybody found out about what she'd done to Mr. Glut, they'd have her jailed, or even killed, or put in a mental home. She'd have to conceal the body, run away, and hide in the woods of Griffith Park, high in the Hollywood Hills, where she would roam and kill like a wild beast until she was finally discovered and slain with a silver bullet. At this thought, she gave another tearful squeal. Weeping, Dorothy cleaned the blood off the Spanish-style tiles in the entry hall and kitchen with her Ocello sponge mop, and methodically put the remains of the collection agent in a large plastic bag, which she placed in the refrigerator to eat later. Oh, how lucky that her father wouldn't be home for another week. She had until then to decide what to do. Well, at least she had enough food. Although, between weeping and listening to Jack Benny, the Whistler, and Stella Dallas on the radio, and watching Uncle Milton Berle and Kukla, Fran, and Ollie cavort on their prized new television set, she grew hungry again. She realized that she had no appetite at all for the rest of Mr. Hubbard E. Glut. Evidently, she had partially devoured him out of mere rage and shock. Listlessly, Dorothy ate some lasagna instead. And so passed the remainder of the week inside the pseudo-Spanish house in the Hollywood foothills. A few times Angela or Luann or other friends, and twice religious representatives of two different exclusive truths, came to the door, besides phone calls. Dorothy said, over the phone and through the door, that she had a highly contagious flu. She gave the same excuse to the newsboy, the Avon lady, and the highly confused welcome wagon woman. As the week's end approached with no thoughts except flight into the hills, etc., her mood became almost frantic. Then, one glorious morning, she woke to find the hair vanished, her body lighter, and her teeth and nails returned to normal. She hastened to replace the pearly peach polish. But wasn't there something else she had to do? The answer came at the week's absolute end, with her body again distressingly short and thin, but human. Clicking her tongue reproachfully at her forgetfulness, she dressed quickly and toted Mr. Hubbard E. Glut's very chilled remains in their plastic sack and deposited them fairly late at night in a public trash bin. Dad Harry returned on schedule, sunburned and exhausted, and demanding fried chicken and beer. Then he went to bed, and Dorothy, again in her padded bra, tight sweater, bouffant skirt, and very high heels, went back to school. She felt relieved. She felt worried. A visit to the place where Dr. Funnyname lived disclosed empty windows and a "for rent" sign. Would the horrible condition recur? Oh, she hoped not. Better to remain thin and skimpy all the days of her life, and never get into the movies at all. Luann and Angela were happy to see her again. They chattered away about the trifling things which had happened at Hollywood High during her absence, and now and again Dorothy squealed with interest, which was only sometimes simulated. Would it happen again? Early one night, about a month later, feeling vaguely ill at ease, she went for a stroll. The malaise increased. She thought a trip to a ladies' room would help, but the one in the park was now closed. There was nothing to do but go behind a bush. And it was there, as she adjusted her dress, that she felt her hands again come in contact with a shaggy pelt. She let out a squeal of anguish and fainted. It was a lucky thing that her dad was once again away, this time on his monthly week-long visit to his girlfriend in the unfashionable section of Malibu, the girlfriend's mother then making her monthly visit to her other daughter in Chula Vista. Now it was impossible for Dorothy to fit into her clothes, so she made a bundle and dropped them into a debris receptacle as she passed it by. How to get home? Slinking was the only way, but as she sought out the most dimly lit streets, she only seemed to get further from home rather than nearer. And oh, was she suddenly hungry? She fought and fought against the desire for immediate food, but her stomach growled menacingly. Well, she knew how wasteful the average American family was. So, of a sudden, she lifted up the lid of a garbage can near a private home with intent to delve into its contents. No sooner had she lifted off the lid and bent over to examine what was inside than there appeared, suddenly, out of the chiaroscuro, the figure of a well-nourished, early middle-aged man with a small mustache. He had a large brown paper bag in his hands, which looked like garbage for disposal. Astonishment was simultaneous. Dorothy squealed and dropped the lid with a clatter. The man said, "Gewalt," and dropped the brown paper bag, then recovered it almost immediately. Dorothy would have fled, but there was a high fence behind her. In theory, she could have turned upon him with tooth and fang and claw, but unlike Mr. Glutt, this man offered no gross importunity. And beneath the astonishment, he seemed to have a rather kindly face. "For a moment you had me fooled," he said. "A better-looking gorilla suit I never seen. What, you're embarrassed? Someone should see you rifling the garbage can. You should have what to eat." He shook his head from side to side, uttered a heavy sigh, which seemed not devoid of sympathy. "I'm not wearing a gorilla suit," exclaimed Dorothy. This time the shake of the head was skeptical. "Listen," said the man. "That L.A. has one weird, what you might call, ecology. This I know. Possums, coyotes, escaped pythons, the weird pets some people keep because from human beings they don't find empathy. Okay. But gorillas? No. Also, gorillas don't talk. They make clicking noises is what. But then occasional guttural growl or a squeal. Say, that was some squeal you gave just now. Give it again." Dorothy, partly because of relief at finding the man neither hostile nor terrified, partly because of pride that anything she could do should meet with approbation, obliged. Not bad. Not bad at all. I like it. Listen, why don't we do this? Come into the house. We'll have a little something to eat. I'm batching it right now. You like deli stuffed cabbage? Warming up now on the stove. Me family ran away on me. Luck with women I have yet to find, but hope I haven't given up yet. Springs eternal in the human breast. Gently, he urged Dorothy forward, towards the house. Sandra hucked me a chinik by day and by night. Shelley would gritchet me in kishkas until I could spit blood. I took up with Mifanwe. We'll eat a little something, we'll talk a little business. No commitments on either side. What we'll eat is anywhere better than what's in the garbage can, although gourmet cooking isn't my line. Listen, you want to know something about shiksas? They never hock you a chanik. They never gritchet you in kishkas. They don't kvetch in public places till you could drop dead from the shame. No. All they do is cheat. Watch out for the step. Dorothy had seen better kitchens, and she had seen worse. However, the kitchen decor wasn't uppermost in her mind. What was uppermost was friendly human contact. Also food. The man of the house, Alfie is the name, filled her plate with stuffed cabbage rolls and plied her with tangerines, asked if she preferred milk or cream soda, and set out some Danish, pointed to a bowl of cut-up raw vegetables, and pointed out that it kept away the dread scurvy, offered her a choice of seeded rye, pumpernickel, and egg bread. Where there is no food, there is no religion. Where there is no religion, there is no food. So my first father-in-law used to say. What a gonif. Eat, my shaggy friend, eat, eat. After quite some time, during which they both ate heartily, and, truth to tell, noisily, Alfie gave grateful eructation, gave a sudden exclamation. Almost missed the news on the video. Finally broke down and bought one. Many a movie big shot it will wipe out of business, they say. But me, it wouldn't wipe out. Pardon my back, he said, as he turned to watch the small screen. Dorothy gladly did so, for quite apart from her contentment in the immediate situation, she was also pleased to watch what many still called video, which was not yet to be found in every room of every house, rather like an ashtray. Neither black and white screen nor sound adjusted immediately, and Alfie adjusted the rabbit ear antennas. At length, a voice was heard to say, Meanwhile, search continues for the so-called monster of the Hollywood Hills. I'll give them yet a monster of the Hollywood Hills, growled Alfie. What are they trying to do with my property values? Communists! Hold up, Nickus. Shut up, Alfie, he advised himself. Two men, besides the television news personality, sat before a background of greatly enlarged photographs and plaster casts. Well, Dr. William Wumple of the University of Southern Los Angeles Department of Primate Sciences and Superintendent Oscar Opdegroof of the County Police Bureau of Forensic Zoology. Won't you tell us what your opinion is about all this? Professor Wumple said, These photographs and plaster casts are of the foot and knuckle prints of the increasingly rare Sumatran mountain gorilla of Sumatra, and I grant you, Professor Wumple, said Superintendent Opdegroof, that there is certainly a resemblance, but the increasingly rare Sumatran mountain gorilla, a native of Sumatra in Indonesia, is vegetarian in its habitat. There is, as you know, no record of an increasingly rare Sumatran mountain gorilla which inhabits the East Indies or Sumatra ever having killed and eaten part of a credit bureau representative and concealed his bones in a plastic bag. The diet of this otherwise harmless creature is mostly the stalk of the wild celery plant, which grows profusely on every wild mountain slope of the archipelago of Sumatra.
Depraved appetite, said Professor Wumple, may be found in any species. I refresh your memory with the fact that pachyderms are also herbivorous, and yet there is the classical case of the elephant named Booby, which fatally trampled and ate a young woman named Anna O. in the Zurich Zoo, who had heedlessly fed him leftover Kümmelbrot from the table of her employer, a dealer in low-priced watch cases named Schultz. The television news personality opened his mouth, but it and the rest of him dwindled and vanished as Alfie switched off the set. Look, so now to business. What did you say your name was? Unwillingly, though I am, to force you out of your chosen anonymity? Dorothy? A girl in a gorilla suit. This I never encountered before, he said, surprised, but rallied quickly. My mother, should she rest in peace, told me that in her own younger days, if a woman so much as smoked a cigarette in the public street, she might as well have gone to Atlantic City with a traveling salesman. But now we live in an enlightened era. Let me hear you squeal. Squeal? Asked Dorothy, somewhat lethargic from food and rest. Alfie nodded. Yeah, squeal. Use your imagination. Say you're strolling through your native jungle and you see, reclining under a tree and fast asleep because she's lost from her expedition. What then? A beautiful young woman. You never seen nothing like this in your life before. So, naturally, you give a squeal of astonishment. Let me hear.
Dorothy, with only the slightest of thoughtful pauses, gave a squeal. Of, she hoped, astonishment.
Beautiful,
said Alfie.
Dorothy gave him a doubtful look. No, he said, I mean it. I swear it. By my second mother-in-law's grave, she should soon be inside of it. Hypocrisy is alien to my nature, even though I never finished high school, but was cast out in the midst of the teeming thoroughfares. What I mean, jungles, which are the streets of our large cities. But of this I needn't bore you, Dottie. Now, use your imagination again. You and this lovely young woman are going along a jungle trail in search of the mysterious lost temple of gold. Her boyfriend, the head of the expedition, gets knocked on the head by a falling coconut, and as he sinks to the ground, simultaneously you, and you alone, become aware that an unfriendly tribe of rotten natives are slinking through the underbrush to attack. Let me hear you convey this information to your lovely human newfound lady friend with a series of intelligent squeals.
Dorothy did her best to oblige, and in the unpremeditated fervor of her performance, began to use gestures.
Alfie was immensely pleased. We'll dub it! We'll dub it! He cried.
She was so excited that she found herself jumping up and down and scratching her pelt. Alfie, watching her benignly, became concerned.
Even through your gorilla suit, you're sweating, he said. Let me get you some ice cubes for your cold drink.
Running water over the old-fashioned all-metal tray, he turned and asked,
Why not take off your costume? You'll be more comfortable, Dottie.
Even as she opened her mouth to repeat that she wore no costume, Dorothy observed a strange woman come running across the dimly lit dining room adjoining the kitchen, and as she ran, thus she screamed, I'll give you! Take off your costume! I'll give you Dottie! I'll give you Shelley! I'll give you me Fanwy!
Sandra, if you hawk me a Chinik, I'll...
Dorothy reacted to Sandra with as little instinctive affection as she had to Hubbard E. Glut. Raising herself on her toes, extending her arms high and her hands out, her talons clawing and her fangs showing, she began to utter squeals of pure rage. Sandra never for a moment showed the slightest sign of believing that she was confronted by someone in a gorilla suit. Sandra turned and fled, giving shriek after shriek of terror, horror, and fright. Dorothy pursued her down the street, sometimes erect, sometimes bounding along on all fours, till the lights of an oncoming car caused her to shinny up the nearest deciduous tree, whence she dropped upon a housetop, thence to another tree, and thence to another housetop, until eventually she realized that she was absolutely lost. Inadvertently scattering the inhabitants of a hobo jungle, she moodily drank their bitter black coffee and spent the night on a musty mattress in a culvert near their fire. The illustrated magazines of a certain type, which those lonely and semi-hermetical men use to while away the hours of their solitude, she merely fed into the flames in disgust. Much of the next day, Dorothy spent in a eucalyptus grove, destined soon to be developed into total destruction. She gave a lot of thought to her condition. It was no doubt the celery tonic in which the incompetent quack doctor Songhab Hongbong van Leeuwenhoek had administered the so-called glandular extract, containing, as the soft drink must have done, certain elements very similar to the wild celery stalks eaten by the increasingly rare mountain gorillas of Sumatra, which had caused this change to come upon her. Of this she was certain. Since it wasn't concurrent with her monthly cycle, and seemed not even to be identical with the full moon, she wondered if its occurrence might have something to do with her sign, Aries, on the cusp. Vaguely, she remembered hearing of a certain economically priced astrologer mentioned by her mother before she left to become an Avon lady in Anaheim. Or so her father said. Perhaps, Dorothy now wondered for the first time, he had been shielding some less respectable occupation. Her thoughts were interrupted with the utmost suddenness by the appearance in the grove of a simian-like creature who appeared equally startled. For a long moment, both stood still, each staring at each other. Was this another increasingly rare Sumatran mountain gorilla? Another victim of the celery and hormone tonic? No. It appeared to be a man in a flea-bitten gorilla suit. And it held a bottle of something wrapped in a brown paper bag.
Listen,
it said. Or, though the voice was slightly slurred, it was a masculine voice, said he.
in times past, honey, when I was a well-known star of stage and screen, I drank nothing but the best Madeira, with a preference for Cercial. But when you're down, it's all over with the imported vintages. Any kind of sneaky Pete will do. Go on, my dear. Go on. Take a hit.
His sunken snout came so near to her face that she sensed it wasn't his first drink of the day. The well-known former star of stage and screen took the bottle and slid the top of it up high enough so that he could uncap it and drink of its contents, and yet quickly slide it back down inside the paper bag. For many people might object to someone blatantly imbibing alcohol in public, even in a eucalyptus grove which had formerly served as the site of a hobo jungle, for to do so is against the law. Next, and though he had gallantly offered her a hit, he proceeded to do the following. Turning slightly at an angle away from Dorothy, he fumbled his paw into his pelt and produced a second bottle, a smaller one, with clear liquid in it. Of this he swiftly drank and swiftly disposed it once again in a pocket of some sort. And next, he took a much longer tug of the cheap wine. Then he offered it to her again, and as she hesitated, thinking of a tactful refusal, he said,
It's only polite to offer, but to insist would be most impolite.
and jerked it away. His voice had become increasingly slurred, and as he lurched off down the road, Dorothy considered the possibility that the clear liquid was vodka. It was only because he half turned his head and inclined it as though in invitation for her to accompany him that she followed. Grotesquerie prefers company, and she thought that she might as well go along, because she wasn't sure what else to do. So follow she did. Now and then some of the passers-by looked at them, but nobody looked twice. Not only was this Hollywood, but this was the famous Gower Street Gulch, as outsiders in the know called it. To those on the inside, it was merely the gully. To outsiders not in the know, it might have seemed as if preparations were being made for the annual cattle drive to Dodge City. So numerous were the men in cowboy outfits. There was a slight stir in their ranks, seemingly caused by a dark man wearing a soiled khaki shirt and faded dungarees, moccasins, and a pair of reddened eyes, who was standing on the sidewalk and shouting, "Slant-eyed folks and Mexicans and very light-colored people, keep the hell out of the gully!" he yelled, in particular directing his cries to several people in war paint and feathers. "Leave the depiction of Native American Indian roles to genuine Native American Indians. You, Marcus Garvey Douthat, professional named Marco Thunderhorse, I'm addressing myself to you. Don't give me no bull about your grandmother being a full-blooded Cherokee Injun." M.G. Douthat, a.k.a. Marco Thunderhorse,
gave a scornful pout and said, "All I have to say to you, Amos Littlebird, is that sticks and stones and arrows and musket balls may break my bones, but ethnic epithets merely reflect upon those who hurl them." Scarcely had all this faded behind them when Dorothy and her lurching companion encountered a scowling young man bearing a sign which read, "So-called science fiction movies. Stop libelous portrayals of so-called mad scientists. Science is the hope of the people." It was not yet the 1960s, but the winds were full of straws. By and by, they came to a high wire fence surrounding a barracks-like compound. And here the senior simian figure paused to drain both of his bottles and hurl them away. Then he approached the gate in, for the first time, a fairly good simulation of an ape-like lope. A gray-haired man stepped out of a booth, beaming. "Gee, good morning, Mr. Bartlett Bosworth," he exclaimed. "Only last night I was saying to my wife, 'Guess who I saw at AESSP this AM, sugar?' And she says, 'Who?' And I told her, 'Remember Bart Bosworth, who played Greta Garbo's boyfriend? And also he played Marie Dressler's grown-up handsome son?' And she says, 'Sure, what's he doing now?' And I told her, 'He's imitating a gorilla for Alf Smatz, king of the D movies.' And she says, 'Oh, gee, what a shame.' And," thickly, from behind his gorilla mask, Bart Bosworth said, "Both of you just take your pity and divide it in two, and then you can both shove it." And he lurched on through the gate. The gray-haired man, no longer beaming, pointed to Dorothy and asked, "Who's this?" "Who's it look like, Myrna Loy?" "My understudy." The gate man turned his attention to other arrivals. Ahead of them was a sign reading, "Alfred Emanuel Smith Smatz Productions. Popular entertainment at popular prices." The way seemed endless, but Bartlett Bosworth evidently knew his way. By and by they came upon a clearing in a jungle. Scarcely had Dorothy time to express surprise in a single squeal when Bart Bosworth, uttering a huge and hideous hiccup, fell full length upon the synthetic turf and began to snore. This dull and repetitious sound was interrupted by a short, sharp slap. A man in a long-considered obsolete uniform of a moving picture director, including turned-around cap, had occasioned this by striking his forehead with the flat of his hand. "Again!" he cried. "Again! Drunk yesterday, drunk the day before. Get him up. Hot coffee. Bennies, if anybody's got any. An ice pack. But get him up. Get him sober." Although a shriveled-looking chap with the air of a superannuated yes-man turned round and round like a dervish, shrilling, "Right, Chief. Yes, Chief. Hot coffee. Benzodrine. A nice pack." Others were not convinced. "It's no use, Mr. Smatz," said the script girl. "Wouldn't help, Alfie," called down the cameraman. "We couldn't get him sober yesterday, and we couldn't keep him sober the day before," declared a blond, youngish-looking fellow in short khaki pants and shirt and a pith helmet. And in a high, petulant voice, a bosomy, blonde, youngish-looking woman dressed similarly announced that she was fed up with all of this stuff. Actually, she didn't say stuff, and in another minute would go sit in her dressing room. "Get somebody else," advised somebody else, "for the ape part." The man with the turned-around cap gave, through his megaphone, an anguished howl. Even in a low-budget film, no one could afford to maintain a shicker gorilla on the payroll. Also," he said, giving the youngish-looking woman a baleful stare, "histrionics in high places I'm not appreciative of. Also, furthermore, in low-budget films, high places ain't so damn high. What? Get somebody else. Who? Get somebody else. Where? Get somebody else for the ape part. The ape part playing is a dying art. Gorilla suits cost a fortune. And if I had a fortune, would I be making D films? No, he answered.
Then an odd expression came over his face. One hand he cupped around his ear. The other hand he used to shade his eyes.
Wait, listen, look. Just before Shika here, he plotted. Didn't I hear a high-pitched squeal, which clearly indicated astonishment and alarm? Sure I did. So, okay, who squealed?
Voices were heard, denying that he or she or they had squealed. Ears were cupped and eyes were shaded. It was very soon indeed that fingers were pointed. Dorothy, realizing that concealment was useless, shyly stepped forward. Alfred Emmanuel Smith Schmatz, Alfie, for it was he, clapped both hands together.
Dottie! He exclaimed. Not only did you chase away Sandra, that Yenta, early this morning I get a phone call from my 30-year-old stepson, Sammy, the schmuck. Mommy is so terrified she swears she'll never leave Desert Hot Springs again. But you are still giving out intelligent squeals, with expression. Bartlett Bosworth never got no expression in his squeals. That's the way it is with them silent screen stars. Squeak, yes. Squeal, no. Are you a quick study, Dottie? Yeah? Good. So take a quick 60 seconds to study the next scene. You got it? Yeah. Yay! Lights, camera, dolly in on Dottie, this great little gorilla lady. Action! Let 'em roll!
The rest is film history, even if much of it must be concealed from the fans and the gossip columns and the world at large. To be sure, Alfie Smatz, king of the D films, was a bit put out at first when he learned that Dorothy couldn't play gorilla roles week after week, but only during those weeks when the moon is full in central Sumatra. But the month has, after all, more than 1 week. The first week, Dorothy, in her own natural form, with artfully padded hips and bosom, plays the heroine in a science fiction film as the daughter of, despite feeble social protest, the mad scientist. The second week, Dorothy is kidnapped from various wagon trains and restored to various wagon trains by, alternatively, Marco Thunderhorse and Amos Littlebird. The third week, Dorothy is, first, threatened by love-starved Arabs, and second, saved from same by the noble efforts of either Marco or Amos in jalabas. But the fourth week, in the AESSP shooting schedule, in the fourth week of every month, Dorothy stars in one starring Genie of the Jungle, the world's most lovable little gorilla film, after another, after another, after another. These movies have wowed the fans in every drive-in in North America and break records in every box office from Tampa to Tahiti. And boy, how the money rolls in. Dorothy has paid off her father's debts and retired him on a personal pension with modest privileges at the gaming tables in the poker palaces of Gardena. Every now and then, she and her blonde, youngish-looking leading man of the moment get into her lemon-yellow Pigafetti Zoom convertible to visit Luann and Angela. They are green with envy. Again and again, separately and together, Luann and Angela wonder, what is the secret of Dorothy's success? It isn't looks. It isn't figure. What? It's showbiz, is what.
Dr. Song Hab Hong Bong van Leeuwenhoek has never been heard from again. Serves him right.
So what'd you think?
I love the story, so it paid off everything I was hoping to get out of it, as far as especially the ambiance, if the 50s really of Hollywood.
Yep.
As I said, my dad would have been there in the 40s, probably before your mother, I guess. But and I recognize some of those streets. They were totally changed from my period in the early 70s when I lived not far up the road. I lived up in Silver Lake, so I used to walk through those streets all the time.
Yeah. I think what struck me, and it's become more apparent to me as I've read a lot more of Avram's stuff, there were some parts that were so clearly Avram,
Yeah, yeah.
and some parts that were so clearly my mom,
Okay, yeah.
and then parts that I could tell. And I probably should have spent a lot more time jotting them down, but almost parts where I could have seen them having friction, like, no, let's go this
Oh, did
way.
you?
Yeah, and my mom probably winning on those discussions, and Avram probably just throwing up his hands and going, "Okay."
Uh, yeah, I didn't know your mom as well. I mean, I knew her for a very brief period. I liked her. I
Yeah,
liked her writing very much. She was I don't want to say this all that outpouring of just energy and intelligence and crazy ideas melded together, like the weird doctor he meets who's half Indonesian and half Dutch. I can't even remember how to pronounce the guy's name. And just
right, right,
an
right,
idea after another, like what the names of the drugstores were and who worked at the drugstore, and all these weird actors driving up and down the roads. I mean, that's all seems like Avram, but um, there's clearly, it's in some ways it's the sort of story I would give to people who didn't quite get Avram normally, because
right.
your mother was a much different type of prose writer. She was a much more traditional,
Yep,
clearer. All the stuff is laid out much more clearly than you would get sometimes in Avram's things. You'd have three, four things happen in a paragraph, in a perfectly Avram structured paragraph. But you really had to work your way through some of those paragraphs. And there was no
right.
work with this. It was an almost effortless read in some ways. All the pleasures of Avram's work and all the pleasures of your mom's work mixed together. So I liked it.
Yeah, I love the where gorilla,
It was a
which
kind of, I was trying to figure out who it was, because the director, the horrible movie maker out in the woods making all these bad movies, because it's like a Roger Corman type, only Roger Corman is clearly obviously more of an artist than this guy was. Or it's like a Ed Wood sort of all those crazy producers that used to run around LA in the 50s making these crappy movies. So it does seem like almost Ed Wood sort of character who's got some sort of studio contract with some lousy fly-by-night studio. And all they're making westerns, and then the end, I don't want to give away the ending, but the ending's a lovely it
oh
works.
no, I mean we've already listened to it,
Oh,
so
of
they'll
course, I forgot.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So they're gonna already, you can do any spoilers at this point.
Oh, okay. Well, the ending is just perfect. It's a lovely ending. Yeah.
The I think a couple of things that struck me, and maybe not right, but the the scene where a little dark, where I mean he's clearly sleeping with her.
Oh,
Uh,
I mean,
he's
I don't know what's happening when he's examining her, quote unquote. Yeah.
he's having, because she says, I haven't done stuff like this since I've been in a car with it, or Chevy or something like that.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
reminded me of some stuff my mom would write in like Dr. Grass. Like
Okay. Right.
that was like Avram would probably have done it in a little bit of a different way.
Uh-huh.
Um, so that struck me
It was a very
as
peculiar scene. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
It
and
was
that
funny that
struck
he
me.
just disappeared, that the character just sort of disappeared from the story. But
Right, and that I could totally see my mom and Avram just going, okay, fine.
oops, I turn this off. Sorry, I gotta turn off this phone.
Oh, no problem.
Um,
Well, any particular, so yeah, any thoughts? Give away any.
I was scribbling. This is the way I feel like with all of Adam's stuff. Sorry, here. I gotta turn this off. Um, I was scribbling notes. It reminded me a little of one thing I kept thinking about. I kept wanting to hear the Kinks' Celluloid Heroes all through it. Let me see if I can turn this on. Do you know the Kinks? Hold on. Han? I gotta go. I'll call you back. Sorry. I hope you can cut that, or maybe not. It doesn't matter.
fine.
On
Doesn't matter.
my show, we leave all that stuff
No,
on. So
no, no. You can just keep going.
I haven't learned how to edit anything. So yeah, I was thinking of all the stuff, all the weird ideas that would come in. There's so many ideas of Avrams. Like at one point, they're listening to the gamelan. Is that a musical instrument at one point when she's in the doctor's office? And all the really crazy little ideas I was scribbling. And then of course I can never read my scribbles. Oh, sometimes the who's the character that's talking in the kind of, it's not Yiddish or Jewish, all this vernacular that he's using.
That's the like, I don't know, he's an agent or Alfie Schmaltz.
Yes, that's how every time he speaks, it's just this wild voice, and it's just such interesting language every
Yeah.
sentence.
Yep.
Avram always had that great ear for especially all those weird. It's the Esterhazy world of all these different. It's the ultimate multiculturalism. All these different cultures just jammed together in L.A. And it just and again, your mother managed to help that tie that onto a string, which I think was a light tighter than it normally is in Avram's story.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, all right. If you were going to adapt this, how would you adapt it? And I'm going to put a caveat on it, which I don't normally do. I
Okay.
kept thinking about all those movies in the '90s where you had a mom turning into the daughter, or the daughter
Okay.
turning into the mom, or uh, uh, some of those Saturday Night Live characters guys turning into women, and
Uh-huh.
all the series of just corny '80s and '90s films.
Right.
But I don't see it like that.
Well, I mean, the people I thought of are probably dating me. I mean, I think of people who like 20, 30 years ago who would have made that movie would have kind of been a perfect idea for them. And the obvious ones to me are people are like the Joe Dante types, those Gremlins type movies, and the people who did stuff based on, or Ed Wood, the guy Tim Burton. Tim Burton is the director for that movie, and I could
I
see
think
him
you're
actually
right.
liking it. And
Huh.
the idea that because it's got that crazy, like you said, old Hollywood hack ideas about people turning into monsters and running around the woods. But then there's all the movie quotes and all the quotes from other movies and the notion that they're making movies out there while she's running through it. And there's people with ape costumes running around with the woman who's really a were ape. And that's all strikes me as a Tim Burton, Joe Dante uh,
I think
fest.
that's a I think that's a really good call. I didn't think about that. And what's funny, I think she might have been in. Did Tim Burton do the new Munsters film or no? Do you know?
I didn't
Sorry,
know there was a.
The new Adams Family.
I didn't know if he did that. You mean the new one, like how recently? Like there was the old one with
Or
Angelica.
maybe, well, I was thinking of what I was thinking of was that Jenna Ortega, who does Wednesday. Have you
Yeah,
seen that TV show Wednesday
yeah.
on Netflix?
I have not seen it, but yeah, she would be much more attractive than the girl in the story who's kind of
That's who I was
yeah,
thinking would have been perfect for Dorothy if I was thinking of who could
yeah.
play her as a modern day
Yeah, she'd be fun in it.
actor.
She's very good in it, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, anything else that on the story or?
no, I guess I just really enjoyed it. I've always wanted to. That's the first time I've read something that your parent that Grania and Avram did together because I knew
Yeah.
they were very fond of each other when I knew them and very close. And I'd read your mother's stuff and I'd read his stuff, of course, for a great deal. And it was nice. They sort of were meant to write stuff together. And she clearly she brought out what she loved in his work really
Oh
well.
yeah. Did you ever read you never read Marco Polo and the Sleeping
I
Beauty?
have got that on my stack here. No, I did read Dr. Grass when it came out years when it
Uh,
first came out in Avon paperback. I have it. So
yeah.
yeah, which made me
Yeah, you
laugh.
should definitely read. I really like Marco Polo and the Sleeping Beauty. And
Yeah.
maybe that was because I was able to read. That was one of the few stories when I was younger of Avram's and my mom's that I was able to read.
I've
So
heard good things about it, not from you, but from other people too. And I don't remember, but I have.
yeah, no, it's got
Looks fun.
it's a nice blend of the two. It's got the sophistication. Not to say my mom wasn't sophisticated,
Mhm.
but it's got the sophistication of Avram and then some of the tightness that my mom would bring to it as well.
I mean, that ability of Avram, he just seemed to have been everywhere. He was like, "Where's Waldo?" in a way. It's just every single world and country and almost every period. I mean, the last story we did together was the one set in the Chinese restaurant, the
Yeah, right. Dragon Skin
in
Drum.
Beijing, which I think I've told you a million times. My wife and I went there the first time I went to Beijing, and we were
Yeah, it's
in that
amazing.
exact restaurant, and Avram had described it perfectly, and it was still exactly the same, 40, 50 years later. And he must have, I knew him for quite a long time. He traveled a little, but he seems to have been gone all over the place in his life. I don't know how he did.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think he did. And seemed to clearly either write down or recall so much
Hmm.
that I think might be lost on some people when they travel.
The memory of Avram, I told you, I'm sure last time, he remembered so much and quotes and names of people, and it was hard keeping up. And
Yeah.
I do remember him very impatient with me for not knowing who a lot of these people were. But I don't know how he could have read so much. I have to say, I don't know, and certainly retained it all because it wasn't
Yeah.
fake knowledge. It was definitely like just
Oh
ingrained,
yeah.
buried deep in him. He just knew this stuff. He read all these weird books he talked about. So
Yep.
I don't know how he did it.
Well, as always, so great to see you.
Great seeing you,
And
Seth. Great job you're doing. Keep it up.
I'm gonna keep working at it. And to the extent that if you read another story and you want to talk about it, I'm always here.
Well, we do have him every once in a while on my show too. So I've been trying to read one of my many projects at the moment has been trying to read through one year he edited at F&SF.
Oh
So
wow.
it's like every 6 months to a year we do an issue that he edited and then one of his books. And
Yeah.
and it's been quite interesting because I do think he was a hell of an editor and it's some really good so far. It's a great year of F&SF. So
Have you had a chance to dig in at all to 8100?
I have dug into it. I've read various things in it. I haven't read it from beginning to end.
Yeah.
I read several stories and I think I haven't read anything bad in it. It's not
Yeah.
if you come up with 100 stuff that hasn't 100 stories and essays that haven't been published, there's got to be some dubious stuff mixed in, but there's nothing bad in there at all. It seems like stuff that could have been in any of his books, I think.
I can't believe I pulled that. I have no clue. I don't think I'll ever be able to do that again. I'll tell you that much, but I can't believe I got that out.
That's incredible work. I did bring up because he had a story. I did a piece on the show on the bathtub show about the new Dangerous Visions, the last Dangerous Visions.
Mm,
Took a lot of stuff out that had been in there for decades and decades, including Avram's story,
the stone the builders rejected. I think
great
that's it.
title. Yeah, the great
Yeah.
title. The Stone the Builders Rejected, which I remembered that title because Avram, I knew him when he had that story. He was waiting for Harlan to publish that book for ages. And they took a lot of stuff out like that, and the stories they had in were not as good. I have to say that. I mean,
Mm,
I thought that story wasn't his best story. It was a very good story, and it wasn't
yeah.
dangerous in many ways, but it was a perfectly good, funny horror story, and
Yeah.
much better and much more lively than a lot of these 50, 100 page stories from new writers that they put in there. I just was quite disappointed.
I mean, I forget exactly. I think I reached out to them and said, "What's your plan with the story?" And they said, "Oh, we're not including it." I said, "All right." So I was happy to be able to include it into
Yeah, I'm
80.
glad you did because it was a story that should be kept out. That should be
Yeah.
published.
And,
Yeah,
and I agree. It's a good story. I'd say, I think you and I emailed it back and forth about that a
yeah, we
little bit.
did.
I think it's a good story. I don't think it's his a most incredible story he's ever written,
But you
but
can see that in any of his anthologies or any of his collections, and it could have made a good little Hitchcock or
yeah,
Broadway theater story if it had been published. I mean,
absolutely.
yeah,
Oh,
which I think
it's
a
a
few
great,
of his stories did. Yeah,
yeah.
they
Oh
did
yeah.
adapt some of his stories for TV.
Oh
Didn't
yeah. Yeah, no, geez, they're the two from Alfred Hitchcock, I can't think of the names right now, but yeah. Well, let's do this again soon.
they? Beth, I'm always here. You come visit. You're doing a wonderful job. I love all the books you're doing, and again, we do have them every once in a while on the bathtub. So we'll talk
All
to you.
right.
Okay,
Talk soon.
take care.
Oh, I suppose God only knows. It sounds like a story to me, some crazy fable that you would not believe.